Arizona side of the border, and she apologized because it's on the Mexico side of the border there. So thank you very much for getting that cleared up. Right now, former Marine, father of three, Armin Brott. He's the author of 8 best-selling books that have helped millions of men become better fathers. He's the host of a popular radio show, writes a syndicated newspaper column. He's an advisor to the Men's Health Network, and his latest book, The Military Father, A Hands-On Guide for Deployed Dads. Armin, thank you very much for coming on the show today.
My pleasure, Chuck. Thanks for having me.
Well, you know, you come here, but with sort of depressing news, and that is military suicide and divorce rates are reaching shocking levels. I got to ask you right off the bat here, Armin, are they worse than they have been, or just shocking?
No, they're getting worse. Traditionally, the military suicide rate has been a little bit less than the general population, and the divorce rate has been somewhat lower than the general population. But now it's kind of catching up to average for civilians and exceeding those numbers now, too. And a lot of it has to do with folks coming back from deployment. It's not specifically the military lifestyle. I think it really has to do a lot with having been through combat.
You know, in Vietnam, you would be deployed for one term. What was it, 12 months, I guess? I think that's what it was.
Yeah, 6 to 12, depending.
6 to 12, you come home. But these guys keep going back, sometimes 2 or 3. I'm not sure how it works, and maybe you know, Armin, but do they have to go back for a second tour, a third tour? Or once you've been over on one tour, do you have... you can decline. I'm just wondering about that.
Well, I don't think you can decline anything. That's the first thing to get off the table. A lot of times, it's what's called op tempo, which is how frequently the deployments happen. They're really not subject to any sort of discussion from anybody else, and the unit will be deployed as often as is necessary. What's happening now, though, is that there have been some changes in regulations from the Department of Defense, and particularly in the Army, that there has to be a minimum of a year now between deployments. And in some cases, it was you'd come back for a few months and you turn around and you head back over again.
What do you recommend that a military father or mother, if that's the case, how do they prepare themselves because of the fact that we've got these rising divorce rates and suicide rates? And I'm going to ask you here in just a moment, how much of the suicide is connected with being departed from your loved ones and your children and things like that? How does that play? But what do they do to prepare themselves other than reading your book? That'd be a good start, I guess.
Well, that's always a good start, sure. But I think
Right.
the first thing they really need to understand is that the process of the deployment actually starts from the minute you get your orders, and the orders are being the orders from your unit saying, okay, you're going to be on Tuesday the 17th, you're going to be showing up at this particular place and shipping out to Iraq. What happens, the process starts right then. The dynamics, the relationship between the deploying service member, whatever service he's in, and the woman that usually has to be a wife in the military these days, that their relationship is going to change immediately. I think a lot of people go into it thinking that they're going to be having this wild, passionate lovemaking before they go and all this intensity and closeness, and it turns out to be kind of the opposite, because you've got a situation where the deploying guy is spending a lot more time with his unit, getting ready to go, learning how to work together, becoming a cohesive group, which is absolutely essential for being overseas. And so he's women would tell me this as I was doing research for the book. They would tell me this over and over again. He's physically there, but he's psychologically absent. He's already
depressed, right?
Checked out in a way, yeah.
And maybe she and he are depressed.
Well, they're a little depressed, and in a lot of cases, there are families, whether they're patriotic or not, that they just may not agree with the war. They may not agree with the reasons for the war. They may not agree with all sorts of things that are going on, and that can really help. If you are very much behind the President of the United States and you're very much behind what our stated mission is, then you can probably have a better time of it. But then there's also the whole issue of staying in touch, staying in contact over the time that you're there. And you kind of alluded to this before, but there's some wonderful research that shows that when the deployed dad is feeling like he's an important part of the family back home, that he has a place in their life, that he's loved, he's needed, he's wanted, and that he feels he really understands what's going on with them. He knows the big events in their lives, even though he's not there physically, but he's up to date on these things. That actually can mitigate a lot of the effects of post-traumatic stress. It's not going to solve it by any stretch, but it can certainly make it a lot easier, because one of the worst things, I mean, you can be in a horrible, stressful situation, but if you feel that you have no particular reason to live, that nobody cares about you back home one way or the other, that's just going to make it that much worse. And so when you do have somebody, when you do have these means of communication and systems that you set up before you go, when those are in place, then you can really maintain something along a little bit closer to a good, close relationship. Of course, it's never going to be the same as it was before, but you can at least try to keep it closer and more active.
You know, I ran into a family shortly after 9/11, and their son had joined. They may have had two boys that had already signed up prior to 9/11. And so then all of a sudden, both of them were going to be detached over to Iraq or wherever they were going to go. But I remember that the parents and the sons, how upset they were, because they had joined to get a college education. And I think, seriously, that there was a lot of soldiers, especially during the early days, you know, because it's all voluntary, and saying, oh, yeah, looky here, I'm going to get a college education, I'm going to get to travel to a different out-of-state post, blah, 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 and then all of a sudden, wait a minute, you know, I don't want to have to go over and fight a war. So that may contribute to a lot of your suicide and divorce also.
I think a little bit. It's an odd kind of a thing. I remember when I was in boot camp years ago that the drill instructors, whenever there was anybody complaining about anything, would be saying, "You begged for this. This is a volunteer army, Marine Corps in my case. It was a volunteer military, and you knew what you were signing up for." And I was in the same situation. I fortunately did not have to go through actual combat, but I joined mostly to get the education, and I think probably the overwhelming majority of people do, especially when there's a recession going on. And
can you hang on for a moment? Got to take a break, and then we'll come right back with Armand Brott. He's the author of The Military Father, Hands-On Guide for Deployed Dads. And how does a father stay active with his children when he's over there and they're over here? We'll be right back.